So as usual for the Sunday Sounds of Dhamma program, we're going to go ahead and meditate for a few moments before I begin the Dhamma talk. And today we're going to do a metta meditation, loving kindness meditation. But as always, it's good to find a comfortable and upright posture where you're sitting. Taking a moment to feel the weight of the body on your seat. Please go ahead and mute your microphones if you haven't already done so. Allowing the body to relax. On your seat. Allowing the mind to relax on the body. And then bringing to mind an image that reminds you of kindness. Just some kind of simple, everyday kindness will do. Maybe it's a hug or a baby laughing, or some cute little furry animal that makes you think, oh, may that being be well. And just holding that image in the mind. Some image, or perhaps a phrase if the image is hard to find, of kindness. And you'll know when you've found an image that supports this meditation, because you can feel that it's a positive feeling. It's a brightness in the mind. Maybe it brings a little twinkle to your eye or a smile to your mouth. Aw, that beautiful feeling of kindness. And perhaps that feeling of kindness can begin to pervade your whole body. Just like a light, a feeling of metta, warm, pleasant feeling, filling the whole body. Little by little, perhaps it starts as just a spark, a little flicker of light. And that light of kindness begins to grow brighter and brighter. You can use the breath to help that light, if you like. Light of metta, of kindness, getting brighter with each in-breath and flowing and filling your body with each out-breath. And perhaps eventually that feeling of kindness, of metta, begins to flow out beyond your body. That light getting still brighter with each in-breath and flowing in every direction with each out-breath. Beautiful. So that brings us to the end of our meditation for today. And I will begin my talk with the homage and the refuges, as I always do. So feel free to chant along if you know the tune, and or just let it wash over you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I want to begin where I started last week, actually, and it's okay if you weren't here last week. Where I started last week was something about this trend of that I see in the media, especially social media, because that's the one that I mostly am in touch with at all, and of people telling you what to do, right? All manner of people giving you advice about how to live your life. Doctors, psychologists, priests and nuns and folks, religious folks of all stripes. The so-called influencers, right? Just random people who have a voice, who have an account. Right. All sorts of people out there telling you, scientists even telling you how to live your life. And I think it raises a question for us, right? Who does it make sense to listen to? What kind of life advice should we actually pay attention to? So last week I was talking about the epithets of the Dhamma, the 6 epithets of the Dhamma, and apparently my memory banks were a little too full, so I'm just going to go over them briefly today again, and then I want to move on to a different sutta. So the 6 characteristics of the Dhamma are the following. So we have svakato, means sorry, if you don't like the Pali, you can ignore it. But for me, it's a little helpful to have a sense of where the words come from when I'm remembering them correctly. So we have swakato, which means well spoken or well said. It means spoken in a way or described in a way that can be understood, something that's accurate in a sense, or intelligible, maybe is another way to think about it. And then you have sanditiko. Sanditiko means that it's evident or that it's apparent. It is something that is, you could say, discoverable, something like that. And then you have sanditiko, ehipasiko. No, akaliko. Akaliko is next. And akaliko is timeless, as they're usually translated as timeless. Timeless meaning something like it's not bound up in a particular culture or bound up in a particular history. But also it means it's not something that waits out in the future. It has an immediacy about it. And then ehipasiko. Ehipasiko is my favorite of the 6 characteristics, if if I could put it that way, if you could have a favorite. And it's because it's 2 parts. Ehi is this word, means come here. Come here. And it's actually the first ordinations by the Buddha were him saying, Ehi bhikkhu. He would say to somebody who said to him, I want to take up the spiritual life. He would say, come here, monk. And that was it. That was their ordination. In fact, Bada Kapilani, also a nun, apparently, the way that she tells it, was one of the first nuns, because she was also told, Ehi bhikkhuni, come here, by the Buddha. Because she was being kind of rude to him, actually. They encountered each other on the trail, and she was kind of standing in his way and demanding some kind of an interaction. But in the end, it worked out well for her. So we have ehipasiko, and then we have opanaiko. I used to live in a room that was called opanaiko when I lived at the vihara in California. All the rooms were named after the 6 characteristics of the Dhamma. And this word means something that leads forward. It leads you into the process. So sometimes it's also translated as leading inward, right? Because that's where our practice ultimately brings us, is back here, to this place, to this body, to this mind. And then pacha tangwe ditabo winyuhi. Right? So this last phrase, pachatang, means an individual, by an individual, and weditabo is the verb wedeti, which means to experience or to feel or to know something. So it's a very intimate kind of knowing. And winyuhi means person who is wise. A person who is wise. So usually this little last phrase is translated as to be experienced individually by wise people. And what that means is that we become wise people by practicing this path. Not just by the culmination of the path, mind you, but by the practice of the path itself. To be experienced. The path is to be experienced. The Dhamma, the truth of our lives, is to be experienced by folks who are wise. And I'll say more about who are the wise in a moment. But as to this question, so these are the kinds of ways that we would know truth, or we would know what it is that is actually Dhamma, that's actually something that represents reality. But those are kind of pointers, if you will. Those are the adjectives or the characteristics rather than the thing itself. So today I want to talk about the thing itself, the Dhamma itself. And again, about this question about who to listen to or how to listen to the teachings, or how you would even recognize the teachings. So the sutta I want to speak about is one, it's very popular in certain circles, very popular sutta, and it's called the Kalamas Sutta, Kalama. And the Kalamas was a tribe, was a clan, a group of people in part of northern India. The sutta says the particular town is a town called Kesamutta, in case any of you are Indian history buffs like myself these days. And the Buddha was arriving there, and they apparently had a lot of people coming through there, a lot of so-called sages. And this is very characteristic of India, I think, nowadays even, but also back then, right? That there are lots of people with spiritual teachings and who had taken up various practices, right? And were giving life advice, just like those folks on Instagram, right? And so these folks in the Kalamas lived in this part of India. And when the Buddha came, he was walking with a group, it said in the sutta, a very large group of the Sangha apparently. And they said, oh, he's here. So we're going to talk to him. We're going to ask him about this problem that we have. And the problem is that all manner of teachers come here, spiritual teachers, and tell us how to live our lives or tell us what they think is the truth. And they trash the teachings of the other folks. They say, oh, no, we are the folks I'm the one who knows the truth. We are the ones who know the truth because of this book or because of this practice or because of what family we were born into or because of any number of other reasons. But then the next group comes and they also say, oh, no, those guys are, confused. And our stuff is the stuff that's right. So the Kalamas say to the Buddha, we're confused. We don't know who to believe, how to discern the truth anymore. And so the Buddha says to them, well, you're confused about a confusing matter. In other words, kind of makes sense. If you're in that situation, you don't know what to do. And then he goes on to talk about how you would be able to tell who you should listen to. So I want to talk about that. And so what sutta are we looking at? We're looking at the Anguttara Nikaya 365, chapter 3, number 65 of the numbered discourses. And so first of all, he starts out by talking about what he believes, what the Buddha taught were the three main problems of a human life: greed, hatred, and delusion. And he asks them outright, he says, do you think that greed is going to make your life better or make your life more difficult? Do wise people praise greed or do they criticize it? And they say, of course, greed is problematic. Right? Greed is not a good thing. And the same thing for hatred, and the same thing for delusion or confusion, lack of clarity. And he says, great. So then, he says, and I'm going to read from the sutta now. And this is Bhante Sujata's translation that I'm using, or I often make a few slight changes, so don't blame it on him. He says, please don't go by oral transmission or by lineage or by testament or by textual authority. So don't go by somebody saying, I'm in a particular lineage of teaching. or I teach from this book, and therefore that must be true. That's not a way to make your decisions about who to listen to. So think right away about what you've heard from Dharma teachers and from other folks, right? All sorts of folks, again, who might be telling you why you should listen to them. And he says, don't, then the next part, which I think is probably the most frustrating part for modern day people, don't rely on logic or on inference, a kind of reasoning, or by accepting a view after you've thought about it, after you have deliberated over it. So logic, it might or might not help you, right? Because your logic may be based in different kinds of assumptions, right? We all carry various kinds of assumptions. We carry a lot of social and cultural messages. We carry messages about our gender, about our role in society, about how our minds work, about how our feelings work. We have all sorts of inputs, if you will, to our quote unquote logic that we may or may not recognize. And then he says, and don't go by the appearance of competence. So just because somebody looks like they know what they're doing, or don't think the ascetic is our respected teacher. So now this one is a very interesting one, right? It's not that he's saying you can't accept somebody's teaching just because they're an ascetic. That is sometimes how it's interpreted. But what I think this thing is saying is actually more like, don't take the words of your teacher on faith, right? You might have to do that for a little while. You might have to have an open mind about something you don't yet understand. But in the long run, just saying, because my teacher said so, isn't the same thing as knowing truth or knowing whether your teacher knows truth, right? In Zen tradition, there's this wonderful, beautiful concept of coming together for practice discussion, and the teacher brings their practice and the student brings their practice, and there's an encounter in which you say, wisdom knows wisdom. You verify your teacher as much as your teacher verifies you by your bringing your experience of truth, and they bring their experience of truth or reality, if you prefer that word. And then there's this moment of coming together. There's this moment of being seen, being known. This will happen with me. This happened with my teacher in Japan, Sekkei Harada Roshi, many, many times. And then later on, when I was at Tassajara, the monastery out in California, people would ask me, oh, what was it like to have practice discussion with Harada Roshi? And I couldn't even explain it to them. I would just end up just kind of with a big smile on my face, like, it was very moving. That's all I can tell you, it's just like that. So we have all these ways that we can't actually rely on in terms of how to know whether somebody is actually understands reality, has some wisdom, knows what's true, and is someone that we could rely on as a teacher. So he says, then he tells us how we can know. He says, but you can know when you know for yourselves. So I want to say that's going back to those 6 characteristics that I talked about just a moment ago and that I talked about last week, right? It's evident, it's apparent, right here, right now. It is something that can be known by the wise, individually, personally, right? So the Buddha isn't giving them the characteristics, he's actually demonstrating, if you will, or explaining according to those characteristics. So he says, when you know for yourselves that some things are unskillful, then, and that they lead to, that they're criticized by people who know the difference between skillful and unskillful, right? When you know that these things, if I do them or I think them or I act on them, will bring harm and bring suffering, will bring more greed and more hatred and more delusion, confusion into my life, then you don't do them. You set them down. Now that sounds pretty simple, right? But not always the case. Simple, but not necessarily easy. Because first we have to learn to observe very clearly what is skillful or not skillful. First, we have to hang out with some folks who are wise to know the difference, right? To check out those cultural assumptions and psychological assumptions and messages that we've been given and all of those things. And we need to learn how to observe our experience in such a way that we can discern, we can check these things out and see the process that's involved. Oh, when I do this, or when I think this, or when I say that, that brings up this kind of greed, or this kind of hatred, or this kind of suffering of confusion. And then having seen it, then you have to take that next step of being able to set it down or not go there or whatever is the thing. And that is hard, right? Think, for example, about addiction. Sometimes it takes a long time for a person to realize that that's what's happening. And then it takes another long time for them to realize why it's happening and that they need to stop. And even knowing that they need to stop, sometimes it takes a long time for them to actually stop. Yeah. Or try saying something simpler, like changing the way that you talk, right? If there's a particular kind of speech that you habitually use, that's unkind, or that's unclear, or that's a lie, right? Think about how much effort it takes you to stop doing that, even if you know it's wrong. This is one reason why we take the precepts, why we practice with the precepts, and we take the precepts as a support to remind us, these are the skillful and unskillful things. This is some guidance for me. This is, I know that other people are practicing with this, and I know that it may be my commitment to that can help me set it down when I know I need to set it down, or pick something else up when I know I need to pick it up. Mm-hmm. So he says, again, the other side of it, right? When you know that wise people have said, this is a skillful thing to do, this is wholesome and unwholesome, and a good thing that will lead away from greed, hatred, and delusion, that leads to their opposites. So now here I'm going to step away a little bit from Bhante Sujata's translation. So if we think about non-greed, what does non-greed mean? So some people jump immediately to kind of like gratitude for what you have would be non-greed. But actually, maybe it's a form of like basic contentment. Like, this is okay, this is enough. Right? I don't need to be grasping constantly at something more, at more food or more material things or more power or more titles or whatever it is, right? Is a sense of being enough. And then non-hatred. So again, non-hatred could go to love, maybe. But non-hatred could be as simple as like having a little bit more neutrality toward someone else, especially someone that you find difficult, right? To move from the side of, I can't stand this person and they really bring up a lot of aversion in me, to a place of neutrality or a place of just being okay, that you know that maybe they're consumed by delusion or whatever it is that bothers you, that is non-hatred, right? That's setting down the hatred for yourself, your inner experience of suffering. And then non-delusion. So what does non-delusion means? Clarity, right? What are the things that lead to clarity, to a better understanding? And here, I always put in a plug for meditation. That's what meditation is all about. It's about having us discover our own sense of clarity about this body and this mind. Because nobody else could do that for you. Not even the wisest of the wise can do that for you. Yeah. The teachers point the way, right? And then he goes on, and this is, I have to say, my very favorite part of this sutta, because the very first teaching that he gives the Kalamas, after he says how you could decide who to listen to, he goes ahead and he gives them a teaching. Because he says, okay, now you might be a little more unconfused. You might be a little more aware. You might be a little more mindful by having set down some of those unwholesome things in your life, having made some better choices for some period of time, for a moment, for a day, for a week, right? For some greater period of time. And then what do they do? What does that person do who has a tiny bit more clarity, less greed, hatred, and delusion? The practice that the Buddha recommended was practice of loving kindness. That meditation that we started out with today. He says, they meditate, spreading a heart full of loving kindness in one direction, in the second direction, in the third direction, in the fourth, above and below, all around and everywhere. They meditate, spreading a heart, mind full of loving kindness. And there are so many things that are right about this teaching at that moment for the Kalamas, but also for us right now. Right? The sense of nourishing the heart, taking care of our own hearts and minds by fostering this sense of loving kindness. And learning how to share it in a way that doesn't even ask us to like everybody or love everybody. It just says, just share it, just spread it, just let it shine. You don't have to pick and choose. You don't have to be able to say yes to this one or yes to that one. Just say yes to all of them. Yeah. So that's beautiful. And it's the other reason why it is a beautiful teaching is because of this last line of the Buddha describing what it's like when we do this practice of the loving kindness, what I call radiating loving kindness. So he says, the mind, heart, chitta is the Pali word, chitta, which means both mind and heart. The way what we think of in the Western world is both the mind and the heart, both the sort of analytical experience and the emotive experience, will be abundant, expansive, limitless, free from ill will, free from enmity and anger. Right? So right away, he's giving them a teaching that is basically telling them and us how to move away from hatred, move away from that second one of the three poisons, move away from one of the key problems of the human world, of the human experience, toward a more wholesome, more clear, pleasant experience. And further, and I promise you that this is true, that you can experience that this human life, your human life, is limitless. That is the nature of life. We go around driven by human frailties, pushed and pulled by the things that hurt us, the things that worry us, the things that we love, by a world that is confused, deeply motivated by all kinds of strange things, strange and terrible things. Yeah? But instead of that, in the midst of that, to be a human being is to be absolutely boundless, limitless thing. This mind is not frail, is not limited, is not pushed and pulled. It doesn't have to be. There is this other aspect. And when we fill ourselves with that beautiful light, that beautiful sense of loving kindness, that beautiful quality, then in a way it kind of squeezes out all that other stuff. Even if it's just for a moment, it's such a beautiful experience that you can know the mind without so much dukkha, so much difficulty. Even just a taste of it is wonderful. Will quench your thirst. And then the Buddha goes on in the sutta to tell about the other three boundless qualities of the mind and about some of the other benefits of the practice. But I don't really want to dwell a lot on that. I want to stay with this message. Now I'm going to do something a little cheesy, because what is the Buddha saying if not, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. Come on, everybody, sing. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for one, but for everyone. Actually, the song is no, not just for some, but for everyone. Thanks, I think, to Dionne Warwick. I don't know if she was the original one, but that was the one I was listening to from the 60s. It was a long time ago. But yes, that is what we need, folks. A little love, a little loving kindness. Please give yourself that gift and know that it is not hokey, that it is not cheesy, it is a very powerful practice. It's a practice that we can do and know that it is leading us to that part of the path where we can actually find our clarity and our peace. Because that part of the path is our human inheritance. Again, it is what the Buddha is asking us to do is discover what is already evident, what is already apparent. We just haven't been able to find our way to tapping into it yet. That's all we need to do. So thank you so much for your kind attention today and your practice.